Hi, Keith here from Academy of Bass. Today I'm looking at one of the most important and best note combinations you can play on bass. And I'm going to show you just how quick and easy it can be to use in your own bass lines. In that opening bass line, I only played two different notes. I was playing over a 4-chord sequence, and over each of those chords I did play a 3-note pattern, but that was made up of just two different notes. Before I get into this, there's a completely free PDF for this lesson. It's got everything in that I'm going to be looking at, fully notated in both standard notation and tab, and I've also included all of the backing tracks that I'm using in this lesson as part of that download. So the link to that is posted below. Make sure you grab a copy. If you do enjoy this lesson, don't forget to give me a shout out and let me know in the comments. And also feel free to like the video and support the channel by subscribing. The chords that I played over were G minor, F major, E flat major and D major, and all I did was play the root, fifth and octave of each chord, no other notes, and the bass line sounded great. So I'm starting here at the 10th fret of the A string. That's my root note, it's a G. The fifth is 2 frets higher and across a string, so I'm at the 12th fret of the D string, and that's a D. And the octave is just across a string. That's the same note as the root note, so we get root, fifth and octave, or G, D and G. And whilst I did only play the root, fifth and octave of each chord, each time I played it rhythmically different, which meant that every variation sounded completely different to the others. And that's why the bass line sounded so interesting and so good. It's a great little pattern, this, and all you need to do is find the root note of any chord that you're playing and play this pattern, and it's going to sound really good. So I'm going to look at exactly what I played over each chord now. The common thread of what I'm playing is that over each chord I'm playing the root, fifth octave pattern up and down. So I'm playing root, fifth, octave and back down to the fifth. But obviously it's very different over each chord. So over G minor, the first thing that I'm doing is accenting the fifth. I'm playing root, fifth, fifth, octave. Over the F, I'm just walking up and down the pattern, but it's rhythmically different. Onto E flat. So I'm playing root, fifth, octave, and when I get to the octave, I'm raking back down the pattern, which is nice and smooth into the D. And over the D this time, I accent the octave. Root, fifth, octave twice. And you may have noticed that I'm fretting this in two different ways. So the first finger that I'm using is to use the first finger to play the root, the third finger to play the fifth, and the little finger to play the octave. So nice and solid. The alternative to that is to play the root with the first finger, use the little finger to play the fifth, and then rock that across the string to play the octave. It's very easy to play smoothly like that. And if I'm being honest, I tend to move between the two depending on what I'm playing. What I would try and avoid is playing the fifth and the octave with the third finger. I see that used quite a lot, and for me it just creates a little bit more movement in the fretting hand, and it can affect your dexterity, which means it can be a little bit more difficult to play fluidly. Now, before I move on and show you just how great this root, fifth octave combo sounds in different bass lines, there's a bunch of really good reasons why it works so well. Firstly, it works equally well over both a major and a minor chord. Because we're just playing the root, fifth and octave, it doesn't interfere with the third, and it's the third of a chord that lets us know the quality of the chord. So a major chord is root, third and fifth, a minor chord is root, flat and third and fifth. Because we're just playing the root and fifth essentially, the bass lines we play will always sound solid and fit really well. And in a minute I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. It also works over extended chords. Now, an extension to a chord is any note beyond the fifth, so that could be a 7th, a 9th, an 11th, or even a 13th. And it also works over altered chords. Now, technically speaking, an altered chord is a chord that has any combination of a flattened or sharpened fifth and or a flattened or sharpened 9th. But the most common chords that we come into contact with that have altered fifths in some way are a minor 7 flat 5, or a 7 chord, a dominant 7 chord with either a flattened fifth or a sharpened fifth. So it works over any chords. Now, if you wanted to, you could alter the root, fifth octave pattern to suit a chord that had an altered fifth. So over a flattened fifth, instead of playing root, 5 an octave, you could lower that fifth by a half step. Or similarly, if you were playing chord with a raised fifth, you could raise that fifth by half a step, but that's completely up to you. So I'm going to start now by showing you just how great this sounds over both a major and a minor chord. This is D minor. To G major. Back to D minor. G major again. So I played over two chords there, D minor and G major, and I purposefully kept what I was playing really simple so that you could hear how it sounded over each chord, but more importantly, so that you could hear how it sounded when we transitioned from the minor to major tonality. For the most part, I kept the root, fifth and octave motif intact. The second time I played a little bit more rhythm. I played the fifth twice. Did the same thing over G. And again a little bit more rhythm the second time. Then I moved up an octave. And the last time I played down the whole pattern. Now the second time through I broke it up a little bit and I just played the root and fifth. A little bit more rhythm the second time. Then I moved up an octave. Then I played the whole pattern down. And did the same thing over G. Root fifth. Up the full pattern and I jumped up an octave. Octave fifth to octave. And then down the pattern to finish. So it sounds really solid and it sounds good over each chord. What I'm going to do now is show you just how good this functions in different styles of music. And I'm going to start by playing a little funk groove in E. Well, it's actually over an E minor chord. Don't forget, everything that I'm playing is in the PDF, so do make sure you grab a copy of that. So because all of this is in the PDF, I'm just going to skim through it. In this bass line, I played the root fifth octave motif in a lot of different ways. Now, the first time I played it like this. So I'm playing open E, then I'm jumping to B, which is the fifth at the second fret of the A string, E the octave at the second fret of the D string, and then coming down. And I also played it a different way. I played B the fifth at the seventh fret of the E string and E the octave at the seventh fret of the A string. And then I played a 2-octave fill. So I played E the octave, B the fifth, E the root, B the fifth and E the root note. And then I broke the pattern up a little bit and I played a variation on this, E the root, B the fifth and E the octave. So instead of playing this E root, I played that open. Now, all of these combined with a little bit of muting made this bass line sound really interesting, and this is just a simple motif, but you can see how effective it is. What I'm going to do now is play this in a much more rocky context, and the chords that I'm playing over this time are A and D. So again, I used the root, fifth and octave as the core part of this bass line and just embellished it with a few things. The first chord is A and I started by playing root, fifth and octave. Then I came back down, I did use the flattened seventh there. Then D's the second chord. I just played root, fifth, octave and back down to the fifth. The second time through was a slight variation on that. This time I just hung on to the D root note because it is rocky after all. The third time is exactly the same as the first. And the final time I played again a slight variation. And this time I brought out the octave of the D. Now, I did say that you can use the root, fifth and octave anywhere, and that's 100% true, but for me, it really comes into its own when it's used in Latin-based music. Now, the root fifth pattern is central to so many Latin bass lines, and in particular the bossa nova and samba, both of which are dances, by the way. Now, because it's dance-based music, the bass needs to be solid and consistent, but the other aspect about Latin-based music is that the bass can be very rhythmic and syncopated, so this is my take on a Latin bass line. I'm playing over 4 chords. The chords are A minor, G major, F major and E major. You might want to have the PDF to hand too because this moves around a little bit. I was playing rhythmically there and with a lot of varied syncopation, but at the heart of that bass line was this root fifth octave motif. I played it ascending, I played it descending, I also played it in different octaves, and there were times when I broke it up and just played the root and fifth, and also the octave and the fifth. And I also just hung on one note at times just to add a little bit of contrast to the bass line too. One thing that I haven't mentioned is that this note combination is used in tons of iconic bass lines, far too many to mention, but check out the music of Stevie Wonder, James Jamerson, Jaco Pastorius, Joe Dart, the Chili Peppers, anything funky and modern pop music. It's used everywhere. The root, fifth and octave is fundamental to every aspect of bass playing. And you can use it in any style of music too. I really do hope that you've enjoyed this lesson. If you have, give me a shout out and let me know in the comments. Don't forget to grab the PDF too, that link's posted below. And feel free to like the video and support the channel by subscribing. Thanks for joining me. Look forward to seeing you again. And in the meantime, happy practicing.